20 years ago, John Stevenson's life froze. Since losing his wife, Emily, he became just a shadow of the man he once was. He has all the wealth that money can buy, but the lonely nights in his luxurious penthouse in Chicago constantly remind him of the emptiness in his heart. One night, unable to bear the suffocating loneliness, he decides to go for a walk under the relentless rain. Each step echoes on the wet sidewalk, as if each beat of his heart reminded him of what he would never have again. A complete life. As he wandered through the dark, deserted streets, he came across a scene that unsettled him. Under the dim light of a street lamp, a young mother, drenched by the rain, held a baby in her arms. The scene, almost surreal, made John's heart race. She wasn't asking for money, not begging for help, just holding the baby with a blank, resigned look. Something about her drew him in. Like a magnet, he couldn't resist. Without really knowing why, he approached and, without saying a word, handed her a generous amount of money. "Please," he murmured, not quite sure what he was asking for. "Take care of him." The young woman looked up, and John felt a chill. There was something in those eyes, an unsettling resemblance, a reflection of someone he had loved deeply. She thanked him, her voice choked, and John walked away quickly, trying to shake off the feeling that somehow he knew this woman. But what he didn't realize was that this simple, instinctive gesture would end up changing the course of his life in an irreversible way. The next day, still disturbed by the encounter, John went on his weekly visit to Emily's grave. It was a painful but necessary ritual that he had kept up for 2 decades. As he approached the tombstone, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks, his heart pounding. In his chest, the same young woman from the night before was there, sitting next to the grave, the baby in her arms. But this time she was crying. John felt a mixture of anger and confusion. How did she know about Emily? Why was she there? He approached slowly, feeling that each step was dragging him into an unknown abyss. "Why are you here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The young woman looked up and, with a trembling sigh, replied, "Because she was my mother." John's world turned upside down with those words. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What? That's impossible. You must be mistaken." But as she spoke, detailing a story that seemed impossible yet true, a growing anguish took hold of him. His mind refused to accept it, but his heart seemed to recognize the truth. Claire, as she introduced herself, was Emily's daughter, the result of a secret she had taken to her grave. John felt a mix of anger and betrayal. How could Emily have hidden something so important from him? And why was Claire here now? What was her intention? He fought the urge to simply walk away, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the baby in her arms, making him feel something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A spark of hope. "If this is true," he began, his voice breaking with emotion, "why didn't she ever tell me? Why now?" Claire hesitated, her eyes filled with pain. "She thought she was protecting you, protecting me, but now that she's gone, I needed to meet the man she loved so much, even without ever being able to be a part of that life." The revelation fell like a bomb. John felt as if he was about to lose control. But at the same time, something in him desperately clung to this new reality. He had spent years isolating himself, distancing himself from everyone, but now in front of him was the chance to regain something he thought he had lost forever. But could he handle the secrets Emily kept? Could he accept this woman and this baby as part of his life? The weight of Claire's words echoed in his mind as he walked away, promising himself he would find out the whole truth. But one question wouldn't leave him alone. Did he have the strength to face what was coming? The day after the meeting at the cemetery was one of the longest in John Stevenson's life. Every minute seemed to drag on as he tried to process everything Claire had said. He spent the night awake, rummaging through the memories of his marriage to Emily, trying to find some clue, some indication that his wife had kept such a huge secret. But all he found were memories of a pure love, untainted, a love that now seemed stained by doubt and resentment. At the office, sitting in his luxurious conference room with a view of the city, John found himself unable to concentrate. The meeting with the company's directors, something that would normally demand all his attention, became a distant noise. The voices blended together as his mind revisited, incessantly, the image of Claire and the baby at the cemetery. Who was she really? And why had Emily, the woman he loved and trusted blindly, never told him about this? That same day, after abruptly ending all his meetings, John decided he needed to confront the situation head-on. He found Claire's number, which she had left on a crumpled piece of paper, and called her. His voice trembled slightly as he asked if they could meet again. Claire, hesitant but hopeful, agreed, arranging a meeting at a small cafe outside downtown Chicago, a discreet and quiet place. When John arrived at the cafe, he saw Claire sitting in a corner, anxiously looking out the window, the baby peacefully sleeping in a stroller next to her. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. He knew that the answers he sought could destroy the image he had of Emily, but he needed to know. He needed to understand why everything was hidden from him. "Thank you for coming," Claire began, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I know it's hard to believe all this. I myself didn't know if I should look for you, but I felt it was the right thing to do." John remained silent, his eyes fixed on her, trying to see beyond the words. He interrupted her, his voice laden with suppressed emotion. "Why now? Why, after 20 years, do you decide to show up?" Claire took a deep breath, searching for courage. "I grew up knowing that my mother had another life, that there was someone she loved very much and who she could never meet. She never told me much about you, but when she died I found old letters, things she wrote and never sent. I knew, reading those words, that you were important to her, and I wanted to understand more about who she was to you, about who you are." Claire's words echoed in John's mind. He imagined Emily sitting alone, writing letters she never had the courage to send. He felt a pang in his chest as he thought about everything that was lost, everything that could have been different if he had known from the start. "Did she write about me? About us?" he asked, his voice revealing the pain he was trying to hide. "Yes," Claire replied, looking directly into his eyes. "She wrote about how much she loved you, about how she wished things had been different. But she also wrote that she was afraid you wouldn't forgive her for having me before you met. She thought you would reject her, that you would never accept another man's daughter." John was silent for a long moment, his emotions swinging between anger, sadness, and an overwhelming guilt. Why had Emily felt she needed to hide something so important? And now, after so long, how could he rebuild this story? He looked at Claire and the baby, trying to find a glimpse of his beloved wife in their features. "And the real father?" he asked, almost in a murmur. Claire looked away, a flash of sadness crossing her face. "He died before I was even born. My mother never wanted to talk much about him, but I think it was complicated. Maybe that's why she kept this secret for so long." John felt a weight lifted, but still, a huge hole remained in his heart. Everything he believed, what he thought he knew about his past, now seemed uncertain and fragmented. In the days that followed, John found himself increasingly immersed in Claire and the baby's life, without knowing exactly why. He knew he couldn't just ignore their existence, but he was also torn. What did this mean for Emily's legacy? For his own legacy? The anger and betrayal were still there, present in every thought. But he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to fill the void Emily's death had left. At the end of another frustrating meeting, where his mind was miles away, John made a decision. He needed to see this story through, to fully understand what had happened. Not for Emily, not for Claire, but for himself. If he had a chance to rebuild what was left of his family, no matter how painful the process, he would do it. In the days following the meeting at the cafe, John couldn't stop thinking about Claire and the baby. His mind was filled with unanswered questions, and his heart swung between the pain of being deceived and the hope of finding some kind of redemption in the new connection forming. He often found himself looking at the phone, thinking of calling Claire, but uncertainty kept him paralyzed. There was so much to say, so much to resolve, that he didn't know where to begin. However, it was Claire who took the initiative. One morning, John found an email from her in his inbox. The words were simple but laden with emotion. "I know all this is hard to believe and accept, but I would really like to get to know you better and for you to get to know your grandson. If it's not too much to ask, I would like to spend some time with you. No pressure, just to talk." John read and reread those lines several times, feeling something stir inside him. Maybe it was the desire to connect with someone, or maybe the need to make peace with the past. In any case, he agreed. They began meeting more often. At first, the encounters were formal and filled with tension. John was clearly uncomfortable, his words measured, and he often found himself lost in thought, watching Claire and trying to find traces of Emily in her face. But gradually, something began to change. The baby, whose name was Lucas, became the center of their attention. Every smile, every child's laughter seemed to break a little of the invisible barrier between them. John, who had isolated himself in his own sadness for so long, found himself laughing, even if hesitantly, seeing Lucas crawl across the floor, exploring the world with curiosity. One afternoon, as they watched Lucas play in a small park, Claire turned to John, her gaze sincere and penetrating. "I know all this must seem strange to you," she said, her voice soft. "I feel that way too, like I'm invading the life of someone I don't know. But I want you to know I'm not here to ask for anything. I don't want money or favors. I just want Lucas to have a chance to know his grandfather." Claire's words hit John like a punch. He had always feared she was only there for his money, that she was just another person trying to take advantage of his fortune. But looking at her in that moment, he saw the sincerity in her eyes. There was a vulnerability there that he didn't expect, a genuine desire to build something real, without ulterior motives. And, for the first time, he allowed himself to believe. "I understand," he replied, taking a deep breath. "It's just that it's a lot to process. For years I thought I knew every part of my life, every detail, but now everything seems different. Like I'm starting from scratch." Claire nodded, understanding. "I know, and I'm sorry for that. I just hope we can find a way to move forward together. I lost my mother, and you lost your wife. Maybe we can help each other fill those voids." Those words echoed in John's mind for days. He thought of Emily, the choices she made, the reasons that led her to hide Claire from him. Was she trying to protect them both? Or did she, deep down, fear that John wouldn't be able to love Claire as his own daughter? The answers always seemed out of reach, like shadows retreating every time he tried to grasp them. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He didn't want to repeat the mistake of pushing away the people who could mean something to him. Gradually, John began to open his heart. He told Claire about his moments with Emily, about how they met, the early years of their marriage, and how her death destroyed him. Every memory was painful, but sharing it seemed to lighten the burden he carried. Claire, in turn, spoke of her childhood, the difficulties of growing up in different foster homes, always wondering who her biological father was and why he never looked for her. The stories they shared were like bridges, connecting two lives that previously seemed irreconcilable. One day, as Claire was packing Lucas's bag, getting ready to leave John's house, she stopped and looked at him. "Thank you for letting me into your life," she said, with a sincerity that made John's heart ache. He hesitated but then approached, putting his hand hesitantly on her shoulder. "It's not easy for any of us, but I want to try. I want to be there for you two. Lucas deserves it, and so do you." Claire smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face. "That's all I could ask for." And at that moment, John felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, a timid, uncertain hope, but real. He knew the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but for the first time in 2 decades, he felt he had a reason to keep going. Despite the progress John and Claire were making in connecting, not everything was simple. As they grew closer, new challenges arose, testing the limits of their patience and determining how much they were truly willing to overcome the past. John, despite all his efforts, still found himself constantly battling the anger and hurt he felt toward Emily for hiding Claire from him. On the other hand, Claire faced her own internal struggle, dealing with the fear of not being fully accepted, It all came to a head at a dinner that seemed destined to fail from the start. Claire had prepared a meal at home, something simple but which for her carried deep meaning. It was a way of showing John that she was trying, that she wanted to be a part of his life for real, not just as a reminder of the past. John arrived late, visibly tired and stressed after a difficult day at work. He entered Claire's house, looking around, feeling like a stranger in what should be familiar territory. "You're late," Claire commented, trying to keep her voice calm. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, but she couldn't help the slightly accusatory tone. John sighed, taking off his coat. "I know, Claire. I had a rough day at the office. It wasn't intentional." He sat at the table, feeling the weight of the tension between them. The baby Lucas was in the stroller beside them, playing with a plastic toy, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. Dinner started in silence, both trying to maintain a trivial conversation about the weather and news from the city. But the tension was palpable, like a storm about to break. Then, in a moment of frustration and fatigue, John burst out, "Why didn't you ever try to find me before? All these years I was here alone. If you knew about me, why didn't you come?" The words came out harsher than he intended, and he immediately regretted it when he saw the pain on Claire's face. "Do you think I never wanted to?" she replied, her voice trembling. "I grew up hearing about you, about how important you were to my mother, but I also grew up doubting whether you would want to know me. I was a secret, something she hid from you, and for a long time I thought it was better that way." John felt crushed by the weight of his own words. He knew it wasn't fair to unload his frustrations on Claire, but at the same time, he couldn't help it. I wanted to have had a chance," he murmured, looking at the untouched plate in front of him. Claire stood up, unable to stay seated as her emotions overflowed. "And so did I, John. So did I. But now we're here, trying, and it feels like every step forward, something pulls us back." The silence that followed was broken by Lucas, who started crying, upset by the tension between the adults. Claire quickly went to the baby, picking him up and rocking him gently. John watched, his heart aching. He wanted to be part of that boy's life, wanted to be more than just a distant grandfather. But how? How could he build something real if he couldn't even handle his own feelings? "I'm sorry," John whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm trying, Claire. I really am. But I don't know how to deal with all this." Claire looked at him, still rocking Lucas, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. "I know you are, and I am too. It's not easy, but maybe we need help." John nodded, feeling a weight lifted, knowing that Claire was willing to work together, even when it seemed they were on opposite sides. "Maybe a family therapist, someone to help us understand all this," he suggested, hesitant. Claire was surprised by the idea, but there was a truth in what John said. Maybe they needed someone from the outside, a neutral perspective to help guide them through this complicated process. They agreed to seek help, even knowing it would be a difficult path. In their first session with the therapist, both felt uncomfortable, exposed, as if every word had to be carefully chosen. John struggled to express his feelings, often limiting himself to monosyllables, while Claire tried to fill the silences, but her own emotions betrayed her. "John," the therapist said at one point, her voice calm and patient, "do you have a specific fear about connecting with Claire and Lucas?" He hesitated, looking at the floor, before finally answering, "I'm afraid of failing. Afraid of not being able to be the father or grandfather they need. I lost Emily, and now it feels like I'm being thrown into a new family I never knew I had. It's overwhelming." John's words echoed in the small room, and Claire felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't expect you to be perfect, John. I just want you to be present. For me and for Lucas, I've already lost my mother, and I don't want to lose you too before we even have a chance." Those words, spoken with such simplicity and truth, hit John deeply. He realized that for the first time in years he was facing a real choice. He could shut down, hide behind his pain and resentment, or he could open himself up to this new chance at love and family, no matter how scary that was, and in that moment he decided he would try. He wouldn't run away anymore. They left the session exhausted, but also with a sense of relief. As if they had finally begun to find a way. The road would be long and full of obstacles, but at least now they were walking it together. As the months passed, John, Claire, and Lucas began to build something resembling a family, even if still full of cracks. The therapy sessions, though difficult, helped open doors to conversations that once seemed impossible. John began to see Claire not just as Emily's lost daughter, but as a woman with her own story, her own pains and hopes, and Lucas, with his innocence and easy smile, became a link that united everyone in a way no one could have predicted. At first, John felt like a stranger in unfamiliar territory. Spending time with Lucas was a mix of joy and insecurity. He had never been. A father never knew what it was like to hold a baby, to hear giggles and babbling. He felt awkward, as if every movement was being observed and judged. But little by little, Lucas began to break down John's barriers. The child seemed to have a natural talent for brightening any room, and John found himself laughing more, playing more, and even singing silly songs to him. One afternoon, while they were playing on the living room rug in Claire's house, Lucas crawled over to John, reached out his little hand, and said in his soft voice, "Grandpa." John froze, his heart racing. That simple word carried immense weight, as if it were the validation he so desperately needed. "Grandpa," Lucas repeated, laughing as he pulled at John's sleeve. Tears sprang unexpectedly to John's eyes, but instead of brushing them away, he let them fall. He pulled Lucas closer and hugged him tightly, as if he was holding not just his grandson, but a lost part of himself. Claire watched from afar, a mix of emotions filling her chest. This was what she had always dreamed of, not just for Lucas, but for herself, all her life. She had felt like a misplaced piece, not knowing where she truly belonged. Seeing John and Lucas together, laughing and connecting, made her feel that perhaps finally, she was finding her place. Despite these moments of joy, there were still many obstacles. John's wounds regarding Emily's secret were not fully healed. Many nights he found himself awake, reminiscing about moments with his wife, trying to make sense of it all. He visited Emily's grave more often, as if seeking answers that would never come. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he whispered, kneeling before the headstone. "I would have accepted Claire. I would have loved our family." These silent conversations with Emily became a sort of therapy for him, a safe space to express all he felt. Claire, noticing John's internal struggle, suggested he talk more openly with her about his feelings, but he still hesitated. There were things he felt only Emily would understand, even if she was no longer there to answer. Meanwhile, Claire faced her own challenges. She had decided to go back to school, aiming to finish the nursing course she had abandoned when Lucas was born. Balancing studies, work, and raising. Lucas was an exhausting task, but she felt motivated. John, seeing Claire's effort, offered financial help so she could focus on her studies. But Claire, proud, refused. "I want to do this for myself," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I appreciate it, but I need to prove to myself that I can do it." This refusal, though understandable, left John conflicted. He wanted to help, wanted to be a meaningful part of her life, but he understood that Claire needed to find her own strength. Even so, he began to do small things, gestures that showed his support in subtle ways. He discreetly paid for grocery bills, bought educational toys for Lucas, and occasionally left a prepaid gas card in Claire's bag. Small kindnesses that spoke more than words. One night, Claire came home exhausted after a long day of classes and internship at the hospital. When she entered the living room, she found John and Lucas sitting on the couch with a book of children's stories open in his hands. Lucas was almost asleep, nestled in his grandfather's lap, while John read softly. Claire stood there watching, a tired but genuine smile forming on her lips. "You're good at this, you know," she said, sitting down next to John. "At being a grandpa." John smiled, looking at Lucas and then at Claire. "I don't know about that, but I'm trying. And I think this is the closest I've ever been to something like this." Claire nodded, taking John's hand and squeezing it lightly. "I never knew what it was like to have a father. But I'm glad Lucas has you. He deserves that." Those words touched John deeply. He knew he was far from perfect, that he still had a lot to learn and overcome, but for the first time in years, he felt he was truly moving in the right direction. Claire and Lucas were giving him the chance to be something more, to build a new family from the broken pieces of his past, and he wouldn't waste this opportunity. As time passed, John and Claire began to create new traditions, small rituals that strengthened the bonds between them. Family dinners, Saturday park outings, movie nights with popcorn and laughter. They weren't grand moments, but they were genuine, and gradually, the walls of distrust and pain began to crumble. Of course, there were setbacks, moments of tension when the past threatened to come between them. But now there was a stronger foundation to face these challenges. They learned to talk about their feelings, to apologize, and most importantly, to forgive. John began to see Claire and Lucas not as reminders of something he never had, but as an unexpected gift, a second chance to have the family he always wanted. The road ahead was still uncertain and full of obstacles, but finally John felt he was no longer alone. He had Claire, he had Lucas, and together they were building something real, something that, with time and patience, could be called home. Although things were going well, the past had a way of returning and testing the strength of the present. For John, every progress he made with Claire and Lucas seemed to be accompanied by a new emotional obstacle. One day, while organizing some old documents in his office, he found a box he had long forgotten. Inside, there were letters and photos from his life with Emily, mementos from a time that now seemed as distant as a dream. Among the papers, he found a letter he had never seen before, with Emily's elegant and unmistakable handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened it. It was a letter addressed to him but never sent. Emily began by describing the deep love she felt for John. But soon the tone changed. She spoke of secrets, of choices made in the past that she thought were best for everyone. She confessed, with palpable pain in the words, about Claire and how much she regretted never telling him the truth. "I wanted so much to tell you, John. I wanted you to know Claire, for us to be a complete family. But every time I tried, fear overwhelmed me. Fear of losing you, fear of destroying everything we had built. Now, all I can do is ask for your forgiveness, even knowing this may never reach your hands." John felt a wave of emotions wash over him, as if each word of that letter was a knife cutting deep. The regret, the pain of Emily. Everything was there. Clear as day, she had wanted to tell him, but fear had stopped her. He spent the rest of the afternoon lost in these thoughts, the letter still clutched in his hands. When he finally managed to pull himself together, he knew he needed to talk to Claire about it. That night he called Claire and invited her for dinner at his house. Something more intimate. Just the two of them. Claire, surprised, accepted. When she arrived, she immediately noticed the seriousness on John's face and knew something was happening. After a quiet meal, John took out the letter and handed it to her. "I found this today," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I thought you should read it." Claire took the letter hesitantly, her eyes, never understood. "I don't know if I can forgive her completely, but I think I can start to understand." Claire wiped away the tears and looked at him, a determination in her eyes. "And so can I. I don't want the past to keep holding us back. If she were here, I think she would tell us to move forward, to try to be happy, even if she can't be with us." Claire's words resonated deeply with John. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had to try. For her, for Lucas, and for himself, the past was painful, but it didn't have to define the future. They had the chance to build something new, something that, though marked by scars, could be beautiful and meaningful. But fate seemed to have other plans. Just a few weeks after that dinner, Claire received a call that shook the foundations of her newly built peace. It was a voice from the past she never expected to hear again. Her biological family's lawyer, he, wanted to discuss pending issues related to her biological mother's estate, and mentioned something that left Claire stunned. There were other relatives who wanted to contest the inheritance, claiming that Claire had no right to anything. Confused and scared, Claire told John about the call. "I didn't even know my biological mother had left anything for me," she said, feeling lost. "And now these people who I don't even know are trying to take it away from me." John, already beginning to feel more protective of Claire, immediately offered help. "I have a good lawyer. We'll find out what's going on and make sure you get what's rightfully yours." The following weeks were intense, with meetings with lawyers, document reviews, and tense encounters with Claire's distant relatives, who seemed determined to disqualify her as an heir. John was by her side every step of the way, offering emotional and financial support. Claire, on the other hand, showed a strength John had never seen. She refused to be intimidated, to let these people push her out of something that, deep down, she felt was rightfully hers. In the midst of this legal battle, Claire and John discovered more secrets about her biological mother's past. A woman who, it seemed, also had a life marked by secrets and hardships. Each revelation brought Claire and John closer, as if together, they were putting together a puzzle that would finally lead them to understand who they really were. When the case was finally resolved, with Claire receiving a fair share of the inheritance, there was a feeling of relief, but also exhaustion. She and John knew that the money itself wasn't the most important thing. What really mattered was what they had achieved together. Claire looked at John, now more than just an absent father, but a true support in her life. "Thank you for being with me through all this," she said, sincerely grateful. "I don't know how I would have managed without you." John smiled, a smile that was both sad and happy. "I don't know how I would have gotten through it either, Claire. But I think, in a way, all this brought us closer, and that's something I never thought I would have." The bond between them was stronger than ever. Claire, Lucas, and John now had not just a shared past but a present built on mutual trust and understanding. There was still much to be resolved, many wounds to be healed, but finally, they were ready to face these challenges together. As the months passed, John, Claire, and Lucas adapted to a new routine that, despite the challenges, was filled with moments of joy and hope. The comings and goings to the hospital became less frequent, and Lucas began to show signs of healthier development. Life, which once seemed like a minefield of uncertainties, began to stabilize, allowing the family to look to the future with more optimism. John, who had spent much of his life focused solely on business, now found himself dedicating more and more time to his family. He had made the decision to partially step back from the company, delegating daily management to trusted directors. He wanted to be more present for Claire and Lucas, not to miss any important moments in their lives. This decision was not easy, especially for someone used to controlling every aspect of his professional life, but he felt it was the right step to take. During a quiet breakfast while watching Lucas play with a toast shaped like an airplane, John found himself reflecting on how small changes could radically transform a life. "You know, Claire," he said, a soft smile on his face, "a few years ago, I would never have imagined my life taking this direction, but now I can't imagine what it would be like without you two." Claire smiled, taking her father's hand with affection. "I feel the same. I never thought I would find you, let alone that we would build something like this. I think, despite everything, we were lucky to find each other." Lucas, noticing the adults were distracted, threw a piece of toast at John, laughing mischievously. John feigned surprise, wiping his face and laughing along with his grandson. "Oh, so that's how it's going to be," he said, grabbing a piece of fruit and tickling Lucas, who giggled, filling the kitchen with pure happiness. These moments of simplicity brought John a peace he hadn't felt in decades. He realized more and more that the true value of his life was not in what he had built with his company, but in the relationships he was now building. Claire, for her part, found herself increasingly confident in her role as a mother and daughter. She had secured a job as a nurse at the hospital where Lucas had been treated, an opportunity that allowed her to help other families and also be close to her son. With growing stability, Claire began to think about something she had never seriously considered before. Her past, after the intense battle for the inheritance. Many questions about her biological mother and her own genetic background remained unanswered. She found herself wondering whether she should investigate more about it. She wanted to understand more about the story that led to her birth, not just for herself, but also for Lucas, who might want to know about his roots in the future. On a quiet afternoon, Claire decided to talk to John about her concerns. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about my biological mother," she began, as they watched Lucas play in the yard. "There are so many things I don't know about her, about what really happened before I was born, and I wonder if it might be important to try to find out more." John was silent for a moment, processing what Claire had said. He knew that this search could bring painful answers, but he also understood her need to know more about her history. "I understand, Claire," he said, placing his hand on her shoulder. "If you feel you need to do this, I'll be by your side, whatever the outcome, but I want you to be prepared for what you might find. The past can sometimes be a difficult place to explore." Claire nodded, knowing John's words were wise, but she also felt this was a journey she needed to take. With the help of a private investigator John hired, she began investigating old documents, medical records, and histories, trying to piece together the puzzle that was her biological mother's life. With each new discovery, Claire felt closer to the truth, but also more scared of what she might find. During this process, John continued to be a constant and comforting presence. He accompanied Claire on some visits, held her hand when the answers were hard to process, and above all, reminded her that no matter what they discovered, they were a family. Claire, for her part, felt a deep gratitude for him. She knew this search was painful for him too, but he was there, by her side, facing the past together. Finally, after weeks of searching, Claire found something that left her speechless. In a forgotten file in an old hospital, she discovered that her biological mother had left her a letter, written before she died. It was a message full of love and regret, in which she explained her decisions, her failings, and the deep wish that Claire would have a better life than she could provide. Reading those words, Claire felt an unexpected peace. There was pain, of course, but also closure, a sense that finally parts of her past were aligning. When Claire shared the letter with John, they both cried together. John, more than ever, felt that Emily and Claire's biological mother, despite their secrets and failings, had done the best they could with what they had. He also understood that what mattered most now was what he and Claire would do with this new understanding. "You have a complicated story, Claire," John said, holding her hand firmly. "But that doesn't define who you are. What matters is what you're building now, with Lucas, with me. We're building something beautiful, and I believe that's what everyone who loved you always wanted for you." Over time, Claire, John, and Lucas continued to create their own stories. They celebrated birthdays, small and big achievements, and most importantly, strengthened themselves as a family. There was still much to explore, many paths to be walked, but now there was a renewed confidence that, together, they could overcome any obstacle. The future was uncertain, as it always is. But for John, Claire, and Lucas, each day brought a new opportunity to rewrite their own destiny. They were not just survivors of a painful past. They were builders of a future where love and resilience were the foundation of everything. With time, John, Claire, and Lucas's life stabilized into a new normality. The routine, once full of uncertainties and fear, gave way to calmer days, filled with small victories and shared moments of joy. Lucas, increasingly strong and healthy, was the light that guided the family forward. His laughter echoed through the house, transforming every corner with vibrant and contagious energy. John, who had stepped back from business to dedicate himself to family, began to feel the desire to contribute in a new way. He realized there was more to life than accumulating wealth and personal success. His experience and resources could be used for something more meaningful, something that could truly impact the lives of others. This is how he began to consider the idea of creating a charitable foundation. One quiet night, he brought up the subject during dinner. Claire, who was helping Lucas eat, looked up with curiosity. "A foundation? What kind of foundation do you have in mind?" John smiled, putting the napkin aside. "I've been thinking of something that could help families going through medical challenges like we did with Lucas. I want to create an organization that provides financial and emotional support to these families so they don't have to face this alone." Claire was silent for a moment, absorbing the idea. She knew how difficult those months had been for all of them. Having access to the best care had been a privilege, But many didn't have that opportunity. "That would be amazing, Dad," she said, feeling emotional. "So many people could benefit from that. I'd love to help in any way I can." That conversation marked the beginning of a new phase for John. He threw himself wholeheartedly into the project, using his contacts and resources to establish the foundation, which he named after Emily and Claire's biological mother as a way to honor the two women who had shaped his life. Claire, with her personal and professional experience as a nurse, became an essential part of the organization, helping to structure support and awareness programs. Lucas, though too young to fully understand, was the symbol of the mission's purpose. At every event, every meeting, John looked at his grandson and felt that, finally, he was doing something truly meaningful, something beyond numbers and financial statements. Claire, in turn, was proud to see her father transform from an isolated businessman into a compassionate and engaged leader, someone who used his power to make a difference in the world. As the foundation grew, the media began to take an interest in John and Claire's story, the tale of a reclusive magnate who found a new reason to live after discovering a daughter and grandson he never knew he had. Captured the attention of many. A major business magazine requested an interview with John and Claire to talk about the foundation and the story behind it. Initially hesitant, John eventually agreed, convinced that sharing his journey could inspire others to do the same. The interview, held in his own home, was a landmark event. John and Claire sat side by side, recalling the highs and lows of their journey, the pains and triumphs that had brought them to this point. Lucas, still young, ran around the room for most of the time, his laughter lighting up the environment. When the journalist asked John what he had learned from all this, he paused for a moment, thinking about how to put into words everything he felt. "I learned that love and family are the most important things we can have," he said, his voice firm and sincere. "I spent a long time believing that success meant controlling everything, being on top, but now I know that true success is being there for those we love, helping others have a better life. That's what matters." The article was a success, and the foundation received a wave of support and donations. John and Claire found themselves increasingly involved in philanthropic work, using their experience to create programs that truly made a difference in people's lives. Claire, motivated by the new phase of the foundation, decided to expand her own work, starting to develop a mentorship program for young mothers facing difficulties, offering guidance and emotional support. Meanwhile, John, seeing how Claire flourished in her new role, began to think of other ways to help. He decided it was time to officially pass the reins of his company to a new CEO, someone who could carry on the business legacy while he dedicated himself fully to the foundation. This decision, which would have been unthinkable a few years ago, now seemed natural and necessary. The transition was smooth, and John felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. Now he could focus all his energy on what really mattered. He began to travel around the country, visiting hospitals and institutions, meeting families and hearing their stories. Each encounter reinforced his commitment to the cause, making him realize that, despite the mistakes and pains of the past, he was finally on the right path. One night after returning from one of these trips, John sat with Claire on the porch of the house. The night was quiet, and the sky, clear, revealed thousands of stars. "I never thought I would find a purpose like this, Claire," he said, his voice soft in the night silence. "Sometimes it feels like I'm living two lives, the first with Emily, and now this one, with you and Lucas. It's like I've been given a second chance." Claire smiled, resting her head on John's shoulder. "I think we've all been given a second chance, and we're doing the best we can with it." They sat in silence for a moment, just appreciating the peace they had finally found. As the years passed, the foundation continued to grow, helping thousands of people across the country. John, Claire, and Lucas became an example of overcoming and resilience, showing that even in the face of the greatest adversities, it is possible to find hope and build something new and beautiful. John, now with a new understanding of what really matters in life, felt that he was finally living with an open heart, willing to love and be loved. And so, the family that began from a hidden secret and broken hearts found a new beginning. They weren't perfect, and the road ahead would still bring challenges, but together, with love and understanding, they knew they could face anything.